everybody, welcome to your English lesson for today. We are halfway through our week. It is Wednesday, the 10th of February 2021. Now our learning objective today is to explore alliteration within a poem. Now might not be sure of what alliteration is just yet, but that's absolutely fine because by the end of this lesson, hopefully, you will have a better understanding of what alliteration is. Let's start then with our handwriting. We're going to practice our letter formation on the handwriting strips at the very top of your page. Now if you've not got your page printed out, that is absolutely fine. All you'll need is a piece of lined paper or plain paper with a line on it so that you can still write your word really neatly on the line. Now you can see we're doing another red word today. Our word is do. When you say do, do. Well done. Now remember, when we do our handwriting, we need to make sure our tummies are touching the table and our back is touching the very back of our chair so that we're sitting up nice and straight. We might also want to remember our handwriting rhymes and letter families, and these are down here. Okay, they're the rhymes that we use to help us when we're writing the letter D and the letter O so that we can write the word do properly. Now then, the letter D is a round letter and it starts just below the first grey line. We go around the dinosaur's bottom, up his tall neck and down to his toes. Now your letter D will look much neater than mine because you'll be writing it nice and neatly on your page. Well, I've got to use the mouse to try and write mine. So remember, it is in a round letter. We start by going around first, then we go up to the top red line and back down to the bottom grey line with a flick. Okay? The letter O, it starts underneath the grey line again. We go all around the orange and it's one big circle between the top grey line and the bottom grey line. Now look carefully, all of my letters are touching the bottom grey line and the top grey line. They're sitting in between those two lines, but they're touching them. Okay, now your job today is to have a little go at writing the word do on your handwriting strip. Try to make your letters the same size as mine are. So you want to make sure that your writing looks just like mine on your sheet. Okay everybody, now we're going to take a closer look at some types of poems. One type of poem is a limerick, which are funny rhyming poems. So here's an example of a limerick on your screen. There was an old Martian named Zed with blue spots all over his head. He sent out a lot of diddy dash dot dot, but nobody knows what he said. Another type of poem is one that we're very familiar with, are shape poems, which are poems that are written in the shape of the thing it is describing. So the poem on your screen, which you can see, is a shape poem for a spider's web. And the poem says, a spider spins a web so neatly, rests a while, then hides discreetly, for food to land on the web that's sticky, escape from which will be very tricky. We're very familiar with our shape poems because we've been writing shape poems before the winter holiday, didn't we? We wrote some shape poems in the autumn. Another type of poem is the ode. Now, odes are written as a song to praise someone or something. So you can see on your screen, you've got a picture of an ice cream. And the ode for this picture is, oh sweet ice cream, the flavour matters not. I will love you forever with every taste bud I've got. We've also got haiku poems which come from Japan, and these are 3-line poems which are written about nature or the seasons. So our example here is beaches, and it says, sand scatters the beach, waves crash on the sandy shore, blue water shimmers. and this poem was by Caitlin Gunther. Now there is another type of poem called an acrostic poem, and this is what we are going to be focusing on this week in our lessons. So let's take a closer look at some of our acrostic poems then, Year 1ers. These are the ones we're going to focus on for the rest of this week. On your screen you can see an example of an acrostic poem. The title of the poem is Sun. Listen carefully to the poem. Sun shines brightly up in the sky, nice and warm on my face. Okay, now I'd like you to think about the question that's on your screen. What do you notice about the poem? Pause the video and have a little think. What do you notice about this poem? I'll give you a little clue. Look very carefully at the start of each line. What do you notice? I wonder if you noticed the same things that I noticed. I noticed that the start of each line begins with a capital letter. And when I look at each of those capital letters, I realise that it says s, o, n, s, o, n, s, o, n. That's the title of our poem. And that is what makes acrostic poems so special. We choose the title of our poem and we write each of those letters S, O, N in capital letters going down our page, just like I've done on our screen. Then we can write the rest of our lines, but we need to make sure that our first word begins with this first letter. So you can see in the poem we've written sun. So it begins with the first S, shines brightly. It describes what the sun looks like. The next line needs to begin with the letter U. And we've chosen up. We know that the sun is up in the sky. It describes where the sun is. Our third line needs to start with the letter N, a word that starts with the letter N. And we've chosen nice. Nice and warm on my face. That's how the sun feels on our face. When we look at an acrostic poem, we can tell it's acrostic if each of the letters at the start of the lines spells out the theme or the title of the poem. Let's take a closer look. Let's see if you can work out what these acrostic poems are all about. Are we ready? So let's look at this first acrostic poem here. Okay, remember the clue is to use the first letter on each line to help you work out what the acrostic poem is about. Okay, use the first letter of each line to help you work out what the poem is about. Are we ready? The poem says, fins are moving, I am swimming, salty ocean is my home. Hurry, a shark is coming. Let's look then. The first letter on the first line is F. The next letter on the next line is I. Then we've got the letter S. And we've got the letter P. Let's use our phonics. Are we ready? I. Sh. What is our poem about? Fish. Well done. Let's look at our second one. We've got dancing on the waves, over the water I jump, long strides swimming, perfectly gliding, happy and playful, I laugh all day, never-ending adventures. Are we ready? Look at the first letter on each line. So our first letter is the letter D. Okay. On the next line, we've got the letter O. Then we've got the letter O. Then we've got the letter P. Our next letter is H. Our next letter is I. And our last letter is N. Now let's look for our special friends. I know that F is a special friend. Let's use our phonics. Ready? D, A, L, F, I, N. D, A, L, F, I, N. Dolphin! Well done! And we can see that in our acrostic poem, the first letter on each line helps to spell the word dolphin. Okay, now this is one of the first features of an acrostic poem. The first letter of each line spells the theme of the poem. There's our fish and our dolphin. Okay, now then, I'd like you to look at this poem really carefully. Look at what each line begins with. What letter does each line begin with? See if you can work out what the title of this poem is. So use those first letters to work out what the title of the poem is. Are we ready? We've got W for our first line, I for our next line, N, there it is, T for our next one, F, and the last letter, R. Look for your special friends. There they are, ready? W, I, N, T, What is the title of our poem? Winter. Well done. You're getting really good at spotting what the titles of these acrostic poems are. Let's read our poem then. It says, wild winds blowing through the cold air. I see icicles hanging from the frozen trees. Night falls over the deep dark woods. Tall trees with their bare branches. Everybody is excited with their speedy sledges, racing down hills covered in white snow. Now we know that the title is Winter, so everything in this poem is going to be describing the winter time. Now that we've got really good at spotting our acrostic poems and realising what the titles might be by looking at the first letter at the start of each line, we're going to move on to look at alliteration. Can you say alliteration? Alliteration. Well done. Now alliteration is a group of words that start with the same sound in a sentence. Okay, so we look at one sentence and we listen very carefully for any words that start with the same sound. Can you say words that start with the same sound? Words that start with the same sound. Well done. Okay, now let's look at this first line. The first sentence in our poem. It says, wild winds blowing through the cold air. What words in this sentence start with the same sound? Listen really carefully. Wild winds blowing through the cold air. Well done, year one. Wild winds both start with the w sound. So that is an example of alliteration. They both start with the same sound. On your activity sheet, can you underline wild winds because that is your first example of alliteration. Okay, let's look at the next line now. It says, I see icicles hanging from the frozen trees. Can you spot any examples of alliteration in this sentence? Any words that start with the same sound? Well done. We've got I see icicles. I and icicles both start with the same sound. And the sound is pretty similar to icicles, isn't it? I see icicles. So that's an example of alliteration as well. We could also say from the frozen, because they both start with the f sound. Okay, make sure on your sheet that you're underlining these examples of alliteration with me too. Okay, let's look at our next line. We've got night falls over the deep dark woods. Are there any words in this sentence that start with the same sound? Well done. We've got deep and dark. They both start with the d sound, don't they? So that is alliteration too. Now it's your turn to have a little go at spotting alliteration in the last 3 lines, but I'll give you a little clue. In this line, there are 2 examples of alliteration. In the line beginning with the letter E, letter E, there are 2 examples as well. And in the last line, there is 1 example. I want you to see if you can spot these pieces of alliteration, these examples of alliteration in the last 3 lines of the poem. Brilliant work spotting your alliteration in that poem, Year 1. You've done really, really well. Now then, the next feature we're going to look for is adjectives. Okay, and we're really, really good at spotting adjectives now. We know that an adjective is a describing word. So let's look at our first line and see if we can spot any describing words. Wild winds blowing through the cold air. Okay, now we know an adjective describes a noun. And remember, a noun is a person, a place, or a thing. Now, in this sentence, I know that there are 2 things. Wind is one thing, and air is another thing. I know that adjectives come before the noun. So in this sentence, I can say that my adjectives are wild, because wild describes what the wind is like, and cold. That tells me that it's very chilly outside. It's very cold outside. The air is cold. So there's 2 adjectives in that first line. I'd like you on your activity sheet to circle those 2 adjectives, just like I've done on the screen. We don't need to underline the noun, so I'll rub those 2 lines out. We just need to circle our adjectives. Okay, now let's look at the next line. I see icicles hanging from the frozen trees. What word is our adjective in this sentence? Remember, we need to look for the word that is describing something. Okay, are our icicles being described in this sentence? They're not, are they? I see icicles. There's nothing describing our icicles there. I see icicles hanging from the frozen trees. Now I know trees is a noun, it's a thing. Is frozen an adjective? It is, isn't it? It describes what the trees are like. It tells me that the trees are frozen. We can draw a circle around frozen as well on your activity sheet. Okay, let's look at our third line. Night falls over the deep, dark woods. What's being described in this sentence? We're describing the woods, aren't we? And we're saying that the woods are deep and dark. We've got 2 adjectives there. The woods are deep and dark. It gives us a little bit of information about what those woods are like. That's what's really good about adjectives. They add a little bit of information to make our writing and our reading so much more entertaining, much more fun to read. Okay then, Year 1, now it's your turn. I'd like you to have a look for the adjectives in the last 3 lines. I'll give you a little clue again, okay? In this line, there are 2 adjectives. In this line, there is one adjective. And in the bottom line, the last line, there is one adjective. Can you spot those adjectives now? Have a little go on your activity sheet. Remember to circle the adjectives that you find. Brilliant work this morning, Year 1. You've managed to work out what an acrostic poem is. You've learned what alliteration is. Remember words that sound the same and are written next to each other. And you've spotted some adjectives in our poem too. Give yourselves a great big clap. You've done superbly. Remember to take a photo of your work and send it over to the adult that's looking after your chat today.